You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about the Radium Girls. So it's over to you now, Mark, for this week's irradiating episode.
Radium Girls were female factory workers who, whilst working for the United States Radium Corporation, contracted radiation poisoning from painting radium dials along with watch dials and hands with a self-luminous paint. These radiation poisoning incidents occurred at 3 factories in the United States at the beginning of 1917 or thereabouts, with one case in Illinois in the early 1920s and one in Connecticut, also in the 1920s. After the girls were told that the self-luminous paint was harmless, the women in each of the facilities ingested deadly amounts of radium after being instructed to point their brushes on their lips to give them a finer tip. The brushes, that is, not their lips. Anyway, the girls were instructed to point their brushes in this particular way because using old rags or a water rinse would cause them to take up and use more time and material, and as the paint was made from a powdered radium, i.e. zinc sulfide and gum arabic and water, it was considered a safe practice for the girls. However, this method of pointing their brushes caused many of these working girls a multitude of illnesses from the ingestion of the radium, which included dental pain, loose teeth, lesions and ulcers, with many of the women developing anaemia, bone fractures and necrosis of the jaw, i.e. the irreversible cell damage and subsequent cell death resulting from pathogenic processes. Following these deaths and other illnesses resulting from the ingestion of copious amounts of radium, there were, of course, numerous lawsuits which, in turn, had a long-lasting effect on the labour laws in the United States and Europe. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you once again for tuning in and listening to this darker-than-usual episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, a podcaster, and a lover of all things dark. Except dark licorice, that is. Ugh. And just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every Monday night, though occasionally on a Tuesday, allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, and the many missing people that go often unnoticed. So if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the radioactive story surrounding the Radium Girls. And this week's necessary disclaimer: this story is a tale that sadly involves themes of horrific radiation poisoning and people dying through misadventure, so may prove upsetting to some. You listen to this episode at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, is like a gift of words to alphabetti spaghetti. Anyway, enough of this tomfoolery. Let's get back to the story. The United States Radium Corporation was a company that was most notorious for its operations between the years of 1917 to 1926, whilst located in Orange County, New Jersey, in the United States. The company was originally founded in 1914 in New York City by a Dr. Sabine Arnold von Schocke, and a Dr. George S. Willis as the Radium Luminous Materials Corporation, with the company producing uranium from carnotite ore, which is a vanadate radioactive mineral similar to phosphate, and eventually moved to the business of producing radioluminescent paint, and then over time to the application of that paint. Over the next several years, the business did well, and as a result, the company then opened new facilities in Newark, Jersey City, and in Orange. In the August of 1921, one of the founders of the company, Dr. Sabine Arnold von Schocke, was forced from the presidency, and the company then renamed itself the United States Radium Corporation, with a gentleman named Arthur Roeder becoming its new president. The company struggled after World War I with the loss of any military contracts, sharply reducing the demand for any luminescent paint and dials. However, after the company struggled for a few years, the demand for luminescent products surged again during World War II, and so by 1942 the company was employing as many as 1,000 workers, and in 1944 the company was reported to have radium mining, processing and application facilities in the towns of Bloomsburg in Pennsylvania, Bernardsville and Whippany, both in New Jersey, and North Hollywood in California, as well as New York City. After the Second World War came to an end, the military supply contracts once again also came to another abrupt finish, and in 1954 radium mining in Canada ceased altogether. In that same year of 1954, the company consolidated its operations at various facilities, including Bloomsburg, and continued to produce items with luminescent paint using radium, strontium-90 and cesium-137 on such things as watch dials, instrument gauge faces, deck markers and paint, with it ceasing altogether all its radium processing in 1968. The following year, in 1969, a new facility at the aforementioned Bloomsburg plant opened for the manufacturing of tritiated metal foils and tritium-activated self-luminous light tubes. A very quick, interesting side note here. Tritium, or otherwise known as hydrogen-3, is a rare and radioactive isotope of hydrogen with a half-life of 12.3 years. It is used as the energy source of radioluminescent lights for watches, night sights for firearms, numerous instruments and tools, and novelty items such as self-illuminating keychains. The United States Radium Corporation also switched its focus to the manufacture of glow-in-the-dark exit and aircraft signs, again using tritium. In 1979, the company underwent an extensive reorganisation, with a new corporation called Metrial Inc. being created to hold the assets of the Bloomsburg plant. And in the May of 1980, US Radium created a new holding company named USR Industries, Inc., and merged itself into it. Fast forward a few years to 2005, and following various reorganisations, reshuffles and streamlining projects, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission decided to decline renewing the licences for the Bloomsburg facility, and so shortly thereafter the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA for short, added the Bloomsburg facility to the National Priorities List for remediation. However, it was all too little too late, as by the end of 2007, all tritium operations at the Bloomberg facility had ceased. As I already mentioned earlier in my introduction, but I'll give you a quick recap anyway. From 1917 to 1926, the United States Radium Corporation, or the USRC for short, which was originally called the Radium Luminous Material Corporation, was engaged in the extraction of purification of radium from carnotite ore, which is a potassium uranium vanadate radioactive mineral to produce luminous paints, which were then marketed under the brand name of Undark. The carnotite ore was mined from the Paradox Valley, located in Colorado, and various other Undark mines located throughout Utah. And as a defence contractor, the United States Radium Corporation was a major supplier of radioluminescent watches to the military, with their plant in Orange, New Jersey, employing as many as 300 workers, most of which were mainly women, to paint radium-lit to paint radium-lit watch faces and instruments, whilst actively misleading them that it was safe to do so. The United States Radium Corporation hired approximately 70 women to perform various tasks, which included the handling of radium. However, at the same time, the owners and the scientists who were already familiar with the effects of radium, using lead screens, tongs and masks, were incredibly careful to avoid getting any exposure to it themselves. And not only that, but even the United States Radium Corporation had distributed literature to the medical community describing its injurious effects. But despite all this knowledge, by 1925, a number of similar deaths had occurred, including the chief chemist of the company, a Dr. Edwin E. Lehman, along with several other female workers. And by 1927, more than 50 of the female factory workers had died from radium poisoning caused by the paint they used. The similar circumstances of all their deaths prompted investigations by the county physician of Newark, a Dr. Harrison Martland. After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at further details of how the radium poisoning started and some of the effects it had on the female workers.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only $3.99. to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
There were estimated to be at least 4,000 workers who were hired by corporations in the United States and Canada to paint watch faces with radium. At the United States Radium Corporation, each of their painters mixed their own paint in a small crucible. On an interesting side note, a crucible is a container in which metals or other substances may be melted or subjected to extremely hot temperatures. Although crucibles have historically tended to be made from clay, they can be made from any material that withstands temperatures high enough to melt or otherwise alter its contents. After the glowing paint was mixed, it was then, by using a camel hairbrush, applied onto the dials. The camel hairbrushes would often lose their shape after just a few strokes, so the USRC supervisors would encourage their workers to point their brushes with their lips or use their tongues to keep them sharp, with the company phrases like
lip dip paint
being bandied about the factory. And because the true nature of the radium had been kept from the workers, the Radium Girls would often paint their nails, teeth, and even their own faces for fun with the deadly paint that was produced at the factory. Among the first to see the numerous problems among dial painters were dentists, when they suddenly had an upsurge of patients with dental pain, loose teeth, lesions, ulcers, and the failure of tooth extractions to heal, with many of the women also developing anaemia, bone fractures, and necrosis of the jaw, which is a condition now more commonly known as radium jaw. And on top of that, the women also experienced suppression of menstruation and sterility. As the factory workers' health deteriorated, they sought medical attention from various problems ranging from dental to cancer, and although there were claims that the aforementioned conditions were caused by the X-rays the women received to investigate their health problems, it was later discovered that the amount of radiation absorbed from the X-rays would be inconsequential compared to the amount they were already exposed to on a daily basis at the radium dial factories. But despite all this, the United States Radium Corporation, along with other watch dial companies, rejected any claims that the affected workers were actually suffering from exposure to radium. I mean, it's not like big companies or governments to cover up their mistakes, is it now?
Do you think?
Anyway, I continue. By 1923, the first female dial painter actually died, but just before her death, her jaw actually fell away from her skull, and by 1924, 50 more women who had also worked at the plant became very seriously ill, with a dozen more having passed away already within a year. Medical professionals, at the urgent request of the company, were told to attribute the workers' deaths to other causes. In fact, the company even sunk so low as to attribute many of the deaths to syphilis, which was actually caused by the radium, but as it was also a notoriously sexually transmitted infection at the time, it was used as a diagnosis in an attempt to smear the reputations of the women. However, things got a little difficult when, of all people, the aforementioned Dr. Sabine Arnold von Schocke, who was the inventor of radium dial paint, also died in the November of 1928, making him the 16th known victim of poisoning by the very same radium dial paint. The only difference between the death of Dr. Schocke and the Radium Girls was that he had gotten sick from the handling of the radium in his hands, not on the jaw. So, it was now time for the Radium Girls to find a lawyer and start their litigation. Another business that was also having similar issues as the United States... I'll try that one again, actually. I'm going to take another run at that. Another business that was also having similar issues as the United States Radium Corporation was a firm called the Radium Dial Company. The Radium Dial Company was established in Ottawa, Illinois in 1922 with the purpose of the studio in Ottawa being set up to paint dials for clocks, with their largest client being West Clocks Corporation, based in Peru, which is also in Illinois. Employees of the Radium Dial Company also began showing signs of radium poisoning between the years of 1926 and 1927. One of the things that the Radium Dial Company did attempt was to end the use of the camel hair brushes. They did this by introducing glass pens with a fine point. However, the workers found that these glass pens actually slowed their productivity down, and, as they were paid by the piece, the workers reverted back to using the camel hair brushes by their own choice. Just on a side note here regarding monies, the rate of pay the girls were receiving for the work was about $1.50 per dial, which earned the girls around $3.75, which today in 2024 is the equivalent to about $89.18 for painting 250 dials per shift. When word of the women from the United States Radium Corporation and their lawsuits appeared in the local newspapers, the women from the Radium Dial Company were told again that the radium dial was safe and that the employees from the USRC were just showing signs of a viral infection, with the co-founder of the Radium Luminous Materials Corporation, a Mr. George Willis, lecturing the women on radium and how it wasn't dangerous, and the students of the inventor of the paint, the aforementioned Dr. Sabine von Schockerke, telling the workers that the paint not only lacked hazardous ingredients, but they also told them that the radium in the paint was being diluted so much that it could not harm their health, and although there were tests designed to determine the toxicity of radium paint to its workforce, the company did not make the records or results available to the staff. That right? So, with the women being assured by their employers that the radium was safe, they returned back to work as usual. Before we go into the second break, I want to take a look at radiation poisoning itself. According to Wikipedia, ARS, or acute radiation syndrome, which is also known as radiation sickness or radiation poisoning, is a collection of health effects that are caused by being exposed to high amounts of ionising radiation in a short period of time. The symptoms of ARS can start within a few hours of exposure and can last up to several months, with early symptoms usually including things like nausea, vomiting and a loss of appetite. It has also been reported that in the following hours or weeks from these initial symptoms, you may appear to improve or feel that you are in fact recovering.
Which is a good thing, right?
Well, not necessarily, because soon after this feeling of elation or reprieve even, you start to develop additional symptoms after which one either recovers or dies. Now, there is an awful lot of technical jargon when it comes to things like atomic formulas and the various names that they go under, some of which have 15 to 20 letters and about 6 syllables each. So I won't embarrass myself by trying to pronounce them, or send you to sleep by going through what each one does. You can, of course, check that out yourself if you wish by going through the various websites dedicated to the subject. Treatment of ARS is generally supportive care, which may include things like a blood transfusion, antibiotics, colony-stimulating factors, or even a stem cell transplant. So, nothing too drastic there then. Acute radiation syndrome is generally very rare, but a single event can affect a large number of people. For example, the 1945 atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1986. After this second short break, in part 3 we will look at the lawsuits and the legacy left by the Radium Girls.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07 852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk, or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
One of the first plant workers who decided to sue the United States Radium Corporation in Orange, New Jersey, was an employee named Grace Fryer. However, it was a slow process because it took her nearly 2 years to find a lawyer who was willing to take on a big company like USRC. And even after the woman found a lawyer, the litigation continued to move slowly. So slowly, in fact, that by the time of their first court appearance in the January of 1928, 2 of the women were bedridden, and none of them could raise their arms to take an oath. The first 5 factory workers involved in the radium lawsuit included Grace Fryer, Edna Hussman, Catherine Schaub, and the sisters Quinta MacDonald and Albina Larice, who were all dubbed the Radium Girls, with the story of the radium abuse that was perpetrated against the workers and the ensuing litigation itself being widely covered by the media. The USRC denied any wrongdoing, No surprise there then. But the settlement for each of the Radium Girls was $10,000, which today is the equivalent to $117,000, along with a $600 per year annuity, which again today is equivalent to $10,600. This will be paid at $12 per week, which is the equivalent to $200 in 2023 for the rest of their lives, plus any medical and legal expenses incurred, which will also be paid by the company. Sadly though, all 5 of the Radium Girls from Orange, New Jersey were dead by the 1930s, so the USRC did not have to pay out as much money as they first thought.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, back at the Radium Girls company in Illinois, the employees began asking the firm for compensation towards their medical and dental bills from as early as 1927, but they were refused by the management, with this demand for money by the sick and dying former employees continuing well into the mid-1930s. So it was not long before a lawsuit was brought before the Illinois Industrial Commission, or the IIC for short, and in 1937, 5 women from the Radium Girls company in Illinois found an attorney named Mr. William Leonard Grossman who would represent them. And fair play to Leonard Grossman, who decided to take on their case pro bono without receiving pay.
Why?
Simply because the women in question were too poor due to their inability to work. The case itself was handled at one of the ex-employees of the Radium Girls company's homes, a Mr. Catherine Donahue, mainly because, due to the radium poisoning, she was too sick to travel. In the spring of 1938, the Illinois Industrial Commission did rule in favour of the women, but by then the Radium Girls company had closed and moved its plant over to New York, and consequently the IIC refused to cross state boundaries for the women's payout. However, on the 23rd of October 1939, and despite the plant moving, the attorney represented the interests of Radium Girls still appealed to the US Supreme Court in the hope that he would get the verdict overturned. But the court decided not to hear the appeal, and the lower ruling in favour of the women's payout was upheld. But, unfortunately, again due to the plant moving from Illinois to New York, some of the women received no payout, and not only that, but by the time the whole matter was officially settled by the Supreme Court, the aforementioned Catherine Donahue had passed away. From what I have read about this case, the Radium Girls story appears to hold a very important place and position in the history of the fields of health physics, women's rights, and the labour rights movement, with the rights of the individual workers to sue for damages from corporations due to labour abuse being established, including the labour safety standards and probable suffering. And not only that, industrial standards for safety in the workplace also improved as a result. And in 1949, Congress passed a bill that decreed compensation for all workers suffering from occupational disease. So I think it's safe to say that the Radium Girls lawsuit and resulting publicity was definitely a factor in the establishment of occupational disease labour laws. After all the lawsuits, Radium Girls painters were then instructed in the proper safety precautions and provided with proper protective wear. For example, they no longer shape their paint brushes by their lips or tongue and avoided ingesting or breathing in the paint. Radium paint was still used in dials as late as the 1970s. However, the last factory manufacturing radium paint shut down in 1978. So, where are the Radium Girls today? Well, from what I can see, several of them are buried in Orange's Rosedale Cemetery in New Jersey. Others are buried in Ottawa's Oakwood Memorial Park and Restland Memorial Park in East Hanover, Morris County, also in New Jersey. And others are buried in various other locations, possibly again in New Jersey.
Thank you for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 132, we are going to be looking at the Goiânia accident. The Goiânia accident was a radioactive contamination accident that occurred during the September of 1987 in Goiânia, Brazil, after an unsecured radiotherapy source was stolen from an abandoned hospital site in the city. It was subsequently handled by so many people that it resulted in 4 deaths and 249 people being contaminated with radiation. In the consequent clean-up operation, topsoil had to be removed from several sites and several houses were demolished, with all the objects from within those houses being seized and incinerated. It has been called one of the world's worst radiological incidents.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations, of course, were all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And, of course, a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I will see what I can do. I will also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast, if they want me to, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up, and I'll subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember, guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by the basic copyright of Mark the Medium.